Hey, so I've been making LUTs for about a year now, and in that time, I've profiled over 50 cameras across most of the major brands. And while each camera is different, there are definitely observable trends and some generalizations that can be made about how each of those brands approaches color. And so I thought it'd be fun to tell you my rankings for which of those brands are more color accurate. Now, color science is one of those weird topics where everyone has an opinion, but subjective preference is often conflated with objective accuracy. And so I'm going to tell you which cameras are actually the most accurate, but that doesn't mean you're wrong if you prefer the look of a different, less accurate image. Art doesn't have to be correct, and besides, that's why I make my LUTs. I'll worry about creating the accurate technical LUTs for you to apply, and you can just keep shooting with whichever camera you like using the most. You'll find a link to my LUTs in the description below, but now, let's get into that tier list. Okay, so we're going to do this a couple different ways. The first one is just going to be the overarching color accuracy, and that has quite a few factors to it. Photo quality, video quality in both the baked-in Rec 709 profiles that are in cameras, like standard and stuff like that, and then also log, how it looks in log when applying the manufacturer's LUT, and then consistency within the lineup. Because if you have a lot of different cameras, but most manufacturers only apply one conversion LUT, then if the cameras have differences, some will be more accurate and some will be less accurate. So if you use 3 different cameras and mix the shots, how consistent is the color? That's another factor here. Let's start off here with DJI. Now, this order was actually just randomly generated when I loaded the images into the tier list maker. DJI, I would probably put in B tier. Now, the interesting thing here is that it's mostly due to consistency because some of the cameras from DJI, and later on I'll do a whole list of like which, if each brand was able to choose their best camera and put it forward, how would that rank? And with DJI, their best camera would probably be like an AA+, maybe almost S tier. But some of the other ones aren't so good. And they have a lot of different things where they, Osmo pockets and Osmo action cameras and stuff that use D-Log-M. And D-Log-M, while actually quite accurate, is often oversaturated and too red. There's a lot of deviation from camera to camera between DJI. But the highs of DJI are really high and the lows are kind of low is the issue. So overall, I'd put them in a B tier. Next up, Canon. I would also put Canon in B tier. Not for the same reasons as DJI though. Canon is actually much more consistent. And I think for that reason, I would actually put them above DJI in the tier list. But Canon consistently likes to do a couple things that just aren't color accurate. They lean too far magenta in the skin tones. It's not bad, but it's not A tier. But consistent, which I really like. Next up, we got Fujifilm. Now, I'm probably going to make some people angry here, but I would say broadly across the board, especially when considering photo accuracy, 709 profiles, things like Eterna, the film simulations, all that stuff. None of that stuff is hitting color accuracy. It's not what Fuji is about. So for this list, they're a D tier. There is one combination for video though with Fujifilm that I would say leapfrogs the Canon and DJI and sits somewhere up here. And I'll tell you that at the end. But when it just comes to overall, if you just, randomly pick something on a Fujifilm camera and shot with it, it probably isn't going to be very color accurate. They lean much more artistic, stylistic, going for a particular look. And that's not what color accuracy is all about. Now, before we go any further and I lose too many more viewers because I'm making them angry by where I'm placing their favorite camera brands, why don't we take this moment to thank Storyblocks for sponsoring today's video. So Storyblocks is an all-in-one creative toolkit designed to help creators tell stronger, more professional stories through video. They are not a text-to-video AI generation platform. The entire library is 100% human-made, created by real filmmakers and artists from around the world. And it's all-in-one because it brings together high-quality stock footage, music, sound effects, and motion graphics templates into a single, easy-to-navigate platform filled with tools to make your creative ideas come to fruition faster. Everything you download is royalty-free, pre-licensed, and ready for personal, commercial, or monetized projects with no worrying about usage rights. The library is deep and diverse with unlimited downloads, and best of all, for a limited time, Storyblocks is currently offering 15% off any annual plan, but that discount is only available through my link. So to start telling better stories with your own all-in-one creative toolkit, head to storyblocks.com/undone or click the link in the description. All right, let's jump back in and make some more people angry. So LUMIX. I'm not sure how people are going to feel about this one, but LUMIX for me is a C tier. Now, I think some people like working with V-Log, the gamma, I think they like. But the V-gamut color accuracy when using the manufacturer's LUT is just all over the place. Everything is a bit too pink all the time. But also, they don't really have a 709 that I find to be particularly good in camera. Like, it's gotten better in recent years, but you remember the days when people were like, I like to use Cine like D, but then change all these settings and whatever. where like people just be like, I just shoot Canon standard and it looks good. But with all of the strengths that Lumix has when it comes to video, which is most of them, they're like pack leading in most regards, color accuracy might actually be their weakest component. And I don't really think that gets talked about a lot. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is Sony. Now, because we're evaluating Sony in 2026, they get to go in A tier. There was a time, 5 years ago or whatever, where it would not be anywhere near A tier. And everybody knows this. I think, however, that some people are kind of stuck in the past when it comes to Canon and Sony. They still think that Canon colors is something special, and Sony, everything is green and weird. Neither one of those things is true. I think starting in the A7S III is when the new sort of platform came out, and then they've been improving it since then, because the A7S III still had a little bit of that green leaning thing. But if you look at any of the modern cameras now, they're doing just as much of the pinking things up to, match the Venice and that kind of thing. I used to always argue that Sony was really color accurate, just some people didn't like it because, those skin tones are too orange and there's too much green over here. But everything else, the green, the cyan, the blues, the yellows, they were all dialed right in better than a lot of the other brands. So I would look at it, I would say, actually, Sony is more color accurate. Maybe you just don't find it pleasing. But also, consistency is huge. I ended up with like 5 or 6 different models where I was like switching between them. I was like, these all look the same. So color consistency is really, really good. And it's the same in their photo modes, video modes. This is all just using the manufacturer LUT. And then there's standard modes for both photo and video. So in that's like PP off, so like movie gamma or stills gamma, they're both extremely accurate. In fact, I would say that the Sony movie gamma, for just somebody who wants like not as good dynamic range, but just straight at a camera good image, although a bit punchy, is one of the best straight at a camera images for color accuracy that you can get. There's one that beats it though, which is Nikon, which I would also put in A tier. When it comes to highs, I think Nikon actually beats Sony. But when it comes to consistency, they're worse than Sony. And part of this is because they're kind of new to the video game. Their photo accuracy has always been pretty solid. But now, when they've had all these new video cameras, and especially now when they're doing some cameras like the ZR can do Red RAW, NRAW, NLOG, and ProRes and H265, and it was worsened by the fact when I think like with the Z9 they made a LUT that was it? I think it was decent for color accuracy, but bad for contrast. They put way too much contrast in the image and kind of lost a lot of dynamic range. So they made a version 2 of the LUT and also made a new LUT for the Z8 when that came out. But then that was the opposite. They had fixed the contrast problem, and then the color accuracy got worse. And then when they partnered with Red, Red started making the LUTs, which are now different than the first 2 other LUTs, and maybe a better balance between those 2 things, but inconsistent with the previous LUTs. Bit of a mess when it comes to all that. And I think eventually it'll iron itself out when it has, like Sony, where it's like 5 years later, oh, they're all perfect. But some of the more accurate variations that Nikon has is more accurate than any of the combinations that Sony has. And so that's worth praising as well, especially when it comes to, again, that baked in standard 709 thing, because I would give the Nikon flat profile, which is an internal movie mode you can set it to, where just lower dynamic range, but it just shoots out a finished image. Nikon flat is probably the most accurate in-camera profile that you can get on any of these. And this one, you don't apply a LUT to it. You just use it and maybe put some contrast on it in post. It is incredible and deserves our first S tier. Nikon with the ZR in NRAW, with the Nikon RAW, applying the new LUT that Nikon and Red collaborated on, gets you, like I said, probably better than any Sony camera. I'd put it here, just below their flat. But then the R3D NE, like the Red RAW on the ZR, applying the LUT that's like the red LUT that Nikon recommends that you use on the R3D NE is like somewhere in here. Let's put it here just to be nice. So it's a big difference between these, which is interesting, that the NRAW gives you a much better result if all you want to do is pop on the manufacturer's LUT. Now, I made LUTs for both the Red version and the NRAW version for the Nikon pack, so you can use either or and you'll get pretty similar results. But it took more work to get the Red one to hit that neutral accurate medium. Now, another caveat for LUMIX that I alluded to allows LUMIX to jump like all the way to the top is that some LUMIX cameras can use ARRI log C3. Unfortunately, I think it's like a paid thing on a lot of cameras, but it might be one of the few sort of paid token things that's actually worth it if making your color experience on LUMIX cameras easier is important to you. Take a camera like the S1 II or S1R2, where again, I'd put it down in C tier if you just shoot vlog and throw on the manufacturer LUT. If you buy the ARRI log C3 thing and then use the ARRI LUT for that combination, then I would probably put it somewhere in here, either just before or just after Nikon like the highest highs. And I got one more, kind of a joke, but I had to create a whole S plus tier for it because it's just that good. Is if you shoot on an old Canon camera, like a 5D Mark II or whatever, and you get the Magic Lantern firmware, and you shoot the RAW format, and then you go through the process where you use the software to like, you know, decode that RAW and convert it into DNG or whatever. Somewhere along that pipeline, there is some color correction that takes place. And the end result that we got out of the 5D Mark II when I had Lee Zavitz bring his camera down and we messed around with it is easily the best out of camera color accuracy I've ever seen. The best looking vector scope, just the best skin tone line. And so Magic Lantern for old Canon cameras, that's the only S plus. That is the creme de la creme. Now let's sort it by if each brand was able to put forth just one, their best contender possible. We're actually, the first few here are probably still in the same order. So Magic Lantern still wins, Nikon flat. And then I'd probably, like I said, I'm torn up about these. I might do the ARRI Log C3 and then the Nikon ZR NRAW with the new Nikon Red collab LUT is probably the next position. And then I would probably put those few Sony cameras that are all very similar, like the A7 IV and stuff like that, which has excellent color. And then I would probably bump maybe the DJI Ronin 4D 8K, specifically that one, because it has much better color than the 6K, to the bottom of A tier. And then for Canon, right around the top of B tier to the bottom of A tier would be their R5 Mark II, which I think is the best. There's some arguments for the R6 Mark III having certain things that are slightly better for color, but I think overall, in all the different modes and the different logs and stuff, the Canon R5 Mark II might be their best color. There's also an argument to be made for the C70, which again, it's almost like between the R6 Mark III and the C70, they hit certain aspects better than others. But if you blend them together, I think the R5 II is Canon's best and is sort of top of B, bottom of A is where I would put that one. And then the LUMIX, like I said, I think their best one that I saw was the S1R2, probably has the best color. But if you just shoot Vlog and put on the manufacturer LUT, I think it goes to the bottom of the list. And so I don't know if they just need like to make a better LUT to make that experience better. I guess that would undermine some of my business because my LUT does that, but you know, I'd like to see it. And then Fuji, if you shoot on the XH2S or the XH2, and there's a caveat because I think on the XH2S now you can shoot like F-Log, F-Log2, and F-Log 2C or whatever. They each have different LUTs. Respect to Fuji for providing different LUTs. I like that. But for color accuracy, the base F-Log with the original F-Log LUT actually gives you the best result. I'd argue that that particular combination probably sits either here or maybe here. Let's put it here to be nice. It's probably tied with the Ronin 4D 8K. Completely different looks though, in terms of perceptual, if you just look at them. But color accuracy wise, it's probably better than the DJI, and it's probably more of tying with Sony. So it's a big jump if you use that particular combination. So I do think it's cool that every brand sort of has a way to get to A tier, you know, with particular tweaks and that kind of thing. Final sales pitch of the day. If you want to just bring all your cameras to probably S tier for color, just get my LUTs. But if you don't want to do that, then hopefully this was helpful in telling you sort of like the best little combinations of things. It's a tier list. Is it really helpful for anybody? This is more just fun and to start a little war in the comments section. But this has been my experience making LUTs. And I found it interesting because I think if you just look on old forums or, you know, just listen to sort of like offhand comments about color science, you'll hear all kinds of things. You know, I've seen things where people like dunk on Nikon's colors and it's just like, what are you talking about? Have you ever actually shot a color chart with a Nikon camera? Like, it's really, really good. Or like talking about old Sony stuff and thinking it applies to new Sony stuff, or thinking that somehow Canon still has the absolute best color when they just have always only ever had solid color. It was never exceptional and it was never bad. It was just always really solid. Anyway, whatever. I hope this video was fun, and just remember that art doesn't have to be correct or perfect or accurate. As long as it makes you happy or you like the way the image looks. This whole tier list thing was just for fun. All right. Catch you in the next one. I'm done.